All right, everybody, so moving on, we're going to be looking at the work of Tommy Ka. And Tommy Ka is a photographer working out of New York City, although he's originally from Memphis, Tennessee. Some of the things he said about his work is that through the framework of the self-portrait, I consistently navigate between the self and otherness in my photography. Themes of likeness and representation are at the forefront of my picture making. I shift between comedy and tragedy, familiarity and forgiveness, performer and camera operator. He's also said, in short, my work is about the self in self-portrait, the portrait in self-portrait, and the hyphen in self-portrait. And so I think with his work, he's thinking about this idea of identity, but he's also thinking about how we can operate within the in-betweens, right? These in-between spaces that allow for you to have a little bit of fluidity in how you define yourself. And here, we're going to look at a few different images from a couple bodies of work. What I find really interesting about his images is that, he incorporates the body in innovative ways. So here you have an image of his mother sitting on a couch, but also you have the presence of his body with this cutout of his face, but also his hands kind of creeping up from the back of the couch. And again, here you can see this interesting way of utilizing, what we know as the conventions of portraiture, but kind of pushing against how we think a portrait can be made. So here again, we have these cutouts of hands placed within these rocks next to the water. And then on the right-hand side, an image of the artist, but printed on a puzzle and then kind of rearranged to make this obscured view of the body and the face. Okay, so again, if we think back to those ideas of what a portrait is, maybe it's time for us to kind of consider, do we think this is a portrait? Do we not think this is a portrait? Like, how is this fitting within the confines of how we would define portraiture? And again, here, this image of the artist kind of peeking out from the doorway. You have these hard lights that are raking across the body, then incorporating different kind of props, I guess you would say, right? It looks like there's something in the mouth here that's kind of reflecting light into the lens, cutouts of eyes. I think the hairstyle here is a nod to Elvis, who I believe called Memphis his home. Always keeping in mind that he's playing with these ideas of identity. If you look at who he is, he's a small Asian American man who is from the South, and that is not something you would think about if you thought about who would be a representative or somebody who represents a part of the South. So I think he's interested in deconstructing those ideas in his work. I think he uses humor quite well in his images, and humor can be a way to disarm people in order to make them enter a work that normally wouldn't be entered into. And so again, thinking about these ideas of identity, he's not only an Asian American man in the South, but he's also a queer Asian American man in the South. So there's another layer into how he's thinking about his identity, how his identity is formed through his images. And on that note, he made this project where he kind of had these staged images of him kissing different bodies. And again, I think there's a large sense of humor in these images. But if we think about these ideas of the Asian male body, it's often not the object of desire when we think about sexual desire. And I think what he does well in these images is he speaks to that theme of desire, where he's placing himself as the object of desire in each of these images. So essentially, he's getting that attention. But if you look at his gaze and his body language when receiving this affection, he's largely indifferent to it, which I think is an interesting way to speak about how the Asian male body has been kind of represented in media and in Western culture. He does a lot of these images, and if you go through and do a Google search, you can see that there's quite a lot of them out there, and they are quite funny. And he gets a good cross section of people to kiss him, which you can imagine how those conversations went at the time of the pictures. Okay, so next we're going to look at the work of Liz Cohen. Cohen is a photographer and performance artist, best known for her project Bodywork, in which she transformed an aging East German Trabant into an American El Camino lowrider, and herself into a car customizer and bikini model. And that's actually the work that I'm going to show you in this lecture. But Cohen's work has been categorized as examining immigration, nonconformity, and resistance. Again, I'm going to show you this body of work called Bodywork. And this is one of the images from Bodywork. And to reiterate what the project is about, he says about the work, I wanted to do a piece where I could really become a part of what I was looking at, where the voyeurism that's inherent in photography could shift over the course of the project. So again, she transforms two cars, the American El Camino and the East German Trabant, into a lowrider, while simultaneously transforming her own body to become a bikini model for her car at the lowrider shows. The project examines her in-betweenness as a first-generation Latina and the child of the Cold War, with Colombian parents who tended to favor Warsaw-packed countries over Disneyland for summer vacations. So again, here, this is another image from Bodywork. And, I think she's also operating within the confines of humor. Like, this is really silly, right? This bikini model body kind of in this skeleton of a car, kind of trying to be sexual, but also trying to seem as though they're operating this vehicle. These are kind of making parody of what a bikini model would do on one of these shoots. Her images are like pretty stylized, right? The colors are rich but slightly muted, but they really pop. This is playing off these ideas of studio photography where the lighting is pretty intentional. The setup is probably pretty elaborate for these photographs. You can see here she's working in the shop, protecting her eyes, but not really protecting the rest of her body. So again, like there's this idea of humor that I think is disarming within the images. This gentleman here is one of the guys who works at the shop. She continued this work for a number of years. You can see here, this is a few years later, where she has had now a child. Child looks like maybe less than 1 year old. Still breastfeeding, so still attached to the mother. So I think she's also speaking to these ideas of womanhood, the evolution of the body, domesticity, all kind of play within her images. Okay, so that was Liz Cohen. Moving on, we're going to look at the work at Martín Gutiérrez. In a practice that spans photography, video, installation, and performance, Martine Gutierrez explores the nuance of gender, race, class, and her own Mayan heritage. Her ever-evolving self-image catalogs a cultural dismantlement of heteronormative American nostalgia. These complicated intersections are innate to Gutierrez's own multicultural upbringing as a first-generation artist of indigenous descent and as an LGBTQ ally. So we're going to look at a number of Gutierrez's photographs, and you're going to see here how there's this kind of reference to pop culture, but she does this in a way that is slightly subversive. Thinking about ideas of race and gender and class and nationality, and also queerness. She's kind of playing with the boundaries of like mainstream representation, incorporating colors and objects that make reference to her Mayan heritage. You can see here that she's kind of obscuring the body. I think also kind of like, how we saw Saruko's work, where there's this reference to the exotic. I definitely think that that's part of this imagery. But Gutierrez's work is like a lot louder. The colors are very saturated, and there's a lot of color in the images as well. These two images here, playing with different kinds of fruit in order to maybe think about how the body is desired. Okay, so these two images here are called Masking Green Grape Mask and Masking Plantain Mask. You could see these as stand-ins for what we may think about as traditional means of beauty of the woman body. Okay, so like the over-exaggerated lips, the large eyes. Okay, how do you decorate the body with things? So referencing maybe a pearl necklace, right? And again, these are kind of funny and a little grotesque, but I think that they're calling attention to these ideas of what it is to be beautiful. You can see here this image entitled Queer Rage. Image, life size, and I'm Tyra. This is from her book, Indigenous Woman, which is largely regarded as a seminal work for her. And you can see here, if we think again about these ideas of portraiture, like I think this kind of is breaking out of the mold of what we would consider a traditional portrait, right? Yes, there's a body present, which kind of I think is required for portraiture maybe, but you're seeing other things that are inserted into the image, right? So there's these photoshopped flat drop-ins of different animals, probably making reference to her homeland. And then you see here these dolls that are kind of dressed like the artist also. So maybe calling attention to cultural upbringing, ideas about what the female body should look like traditionally. Okay. So she's playing with what the image of an artist or a portrait could be. So again, here making reference to popular culture. This is called Identity Boots ad, again from Indigenous Woman, 2018. So this is kind of reference to the 60s style flyer. So this idea of identity boots, like whose shoes are you walking in, right? Do you have to walk in your own shoes? Do you have to follow in other people's footsteps? Do you follow in your own footsteps? You make your own footsteps. And finally here, this is called Helena 2001, or sorry, this is called Helena 2021, and Judith. So Helena here, Judith here. In her statement, she's talking about challenging these ideas of beauty. And I mean, I think that was definitely happening with some of the earlier work. This more recent work, I would question. I think like her being a trans body. I think that maybe she's playing into this idea of beauty now, right? Like we have this voluptuous figure in both of these images, and maybe make the argument that this is playing into this idea of traditional female beauty. But the fact that we're questioning it, I think, is important. Right? Hence the power of the work. And so next here, we're going to look at Catherine Opie. And Catherine Opie is an artist who is based out of LA. She's a professor at UCLA, where she is head of the photo program there. And Opie's work investigates the ways in which the photograph both documents and gives voice to social phenomena in America today, registering people's attitudes and relationships to themselves and others, and the ways in which they occupy landscape. At the core of her investigations are perplexing questions about relationships to community, which she explores on multiple levels across her bodies of work. Working between conceptual and documentary approaches to image making, Opie examines familiar genres, portraiture, landscape, studio photography, and surprising uses of serial images, unexpected compositions, and the pursuit of radically different subject matter in parallel. Many of her works capture the expression of individual identity through groups, couples, teams, and crowds, and reveal an undercurrent of her own biology vis-a-vis her subjects. Okay, so we're going to look at a few of her images here, and these first images here are kind of what got people paying attention to Catherine Opie's work. So this image here is called Self-Portrait / Cutting, and this is from 1993. And again, we're thinking about these ideas of queerness. And in the case of Opie, she is calling attention to, the conventional representation of what a family is, right? So the image carved into her back here is very childlike in its rendering. If you think about how a child would draw a picture of their family, this is kind of stereotypically that. But you can see here the difference is there are two figures both wearing skirts holding hands, so she's calling attention to her queerness here. But it's carved into the body, so it's like, there was this direct reference of how queerness was unacceptable for a long time in American society, and in some places it still is, and how it has a direct effect on one's body. This next image here is called Self-Portrait Nursing. And you can see this is Opie nursing her son. Something that I want to point out with her images is, again, it's calling attention to that studio portrait style. If you think back to the Carte Vista, or even back further to painters like Bronzino or other painters from the Renaissance, there's this like opulent background that's present in a lot of her portraiture, calling attention to this really lovely drapery and this color here. But being the backdrop for something that is not, or was not at the time, largely represented in not only art, but in popular or widely accepted cultures. So sticking with her identity, this image here was probably one of her most striking images, and it's called Self-Portrait Pervert. And you can see here that she is again carved into her own body, talking about how perceptions of queerness act upon the body. She's also pierced her body as well. So she's calling she's calling the viewer to look at the things that she experiences, and how she defines her own sexuality. She's also made images of people in her community. And I should say that this is just a cross-section of what Catherine Opie's done throughout her work. And I'm actually going to show you a video here of her talking about her practice.
So what happened in the LA Times on Friday? You have Donnie Youngblood, who's a sheriff in Kern County, talking about violence. You have police pushing back protesters. And you have a great catch made by a baseball player. You know, I picked up my first camera actually on my 9th birthday. It was given to me as a birthday present. I was born in 1961. And the Life magazines and Look magazines that were strewn in the house were things that I sat and looked at as a child a lot and began to think about what it meant to make photographs and how these photographs begin to actually create a larger narrative. But I started mapping things out at that point. Being and Having was the first body of work that actually got shown in a gallery. So one of the things that I was doing is, you know, still looking around in relationship to my neighborhoods and my communities. And at the same time, I was going out with my friends on my motorcycles, all dressed up in leather and wearing fake mustaches. And so basically I gave my friends money to go buy mustaches at the Hollywood Wig Store on Hollywood Boulevard. There's humor in it, but also within humor, you can explore all these kind of other relationships of what it is to deal with homophobia and how it's constructed within our society. I was making myself vulnerable because I knew that I had to put myself within the body of work for the body of work to actually function in relationship to a larger identity, that I couldn't just be a voyeur within my own community, that I had to be a participant in it. Without representation, you can't make change. And I think that all of us are incredibly vulnerable, and that's where this base of fear comes through, is this vulnerability and the lack of education. And so community is a great way to begin to articulate the more complex ideas around that. Constantly try to reinvent your own self as an artist, I think. A huge shift for everybody who had thought of me just as the studio photographer who was making queer photographs. All of a sudden they were looking at platinum prints of freeways. And I remember the first time I showed them was in Long Beach, this person looking at the photographs and going, oh, they've got the wall labels wrong. This isn't Catherine Opie's work. And it was like, okay, that was exactly why I had to make that shift. Because if you look from age 9 all the way through of never not putting down a camera, there is so many different layers in relationship to what I'm interested in terms of creating representations. I think it's really hard to be a photographer right now. The incredible amount of images in our society have allowed us to read images really quickly. But what is that quickness in relationship to how images form history? So I've been collecting every cross-section of magazine as well as every LA Times since Trump has been elected. And every day, all the images are cut out of the newspaper. A lot of guns. You know, hands holding guns. Slinkies and guns. Who knows? I would never want to say good subject matter, but I feel like pressing up against it is important in relationship to understanding the incredible complexities that we face in terms of humanity and living in this world. I know how photography can serve us and what it is supposed to be doing, but is it doing it in a way that's allowing the discourse to move forward is a place of great questioning for me.
Okay, so moving on, we're going to look at the work of Latoya Ruby Frazier. And Latoya Ruby Frazier was born in Braddock, Pennsylvania, and she currently lives in Chicago. She's an artist, activist, and she uses photography, video, and performance to document personal and social histories of the United States, specifically to the industrial heartland. Growing up in the shadow of the steel industry, Frazier has chronicled the healthcare inequities and environmental crisis faced by her family in her hometown of Braddock, Pennsylvania. The artist employs a radical, intimate, black and white documentary approach that captures the complexity, injustice, and simultaneously hope of the Black American experience, often utilizing her camera as the medium of photography as an agent for social change. So we're going to look at some of the work she's done in and around her home of Braddock. Here, portrait of her and her mother. Every time I think about her work, I think about this picture. It's such an interesting way to speak about, generations, the experience between a mother and a daughter, and how that can change from one generation to the next, or it could stay the same depending on not only the external factors working against them, but also how they make decisions throughout their life. And, we're again thinking about portraiture, and, maybe it's worth revisiting the question again, what is a portrait? Maybe think, do you consider this a portrait? I mean, there's no body there, but there is the body of people through imagery, right? So does a portrait have to encompass somebody's body? So meaning, do you have to have the sitter present in the portrait or the picture? This image here is making reference to the classic image titled American Gothic, but through a different interpretation. And here, giving a glance into the home. So, again, I think pushing back against these ideas of representation of the familial unit. I think a lot of times in mass culture, we're seeing Black bodies and Black families represented in a particular way. And I think part of what Ruby Frazier is doing is trying to subvert that idea. This image here, I think, being a good representation of that. Okay, so next we're going to look at the work of Wendy Redstar. And Wendy Redstar makes work arising from her Native American cultural heritage and family history, as well as her expansive interest in photography, video, sound, and sculpture, as well as fiber art and performance. Redstar's artistic practice involves an ongoing research into historical archives and narratives, which she thoroughly deconstructs to explore the intersection of Native American ideologies and colonialism's unsettling effects on past and present. She is from the Crow tribe, and they are based, I believe, in Montana. And so I'm going to show you 4 images from her body of work um, called 4 Seasons. This here is the first image, and actually she's not traditionally a photographer. I believe she studied sculpture in graduate school, but she's kind of involved photography in her practice quite heavily, to the point where she's kind of been accepted as a photographer. And so in this 4-part photographic work, Red Star pokes fun at the romantic idealizations of the American Indian as one with nature. She depicts herself dressed in traditional Crow regalia in 4 majestic landscapes, one for each season. Inflatable animals, plastic flowers, astroturf, and other artificial materials reference the diorama to native peoples, often seen in natural history museums. The panoramic images of Western landscape, commercially produced in the 1970s, are reflected in these prints. So again, like other artists we've seen, Wendy Red Star is using this idea of humor to kind of dismantle our perception of, in this case, stereotypes about the Native American. And in here, you can see that there is quite a lot of humor in it. Right? She's assuming a pose that is quite serious, but around her, it's it's an inflatable deer and fake leaves. In this image here, she's sitting in what is, we assume, to be winter, but clearly it's not that cold in there. You can see the cotton kind of used to represent snow. The fake crows on the left-hand side here. Again, you see that bull's or ram's skull that's appeared in the last image. And notice how the gaze is kind of very confrontational, right? It's almost asking you, like, what are you looking at? And why are you looking at me? And am I what you think I am? This image here is spring from the 4 series season. And I should say that this was done in 2006. In this image, you see the cutouts of both animals. Okay. The backdrop, you can see, is actually creased, right? So she's not trying to fool you here. She's showing you exactly what she intends you to see. You're meant to know that this is fake. Okay. And finally, we have here, this is summer. And this is, I think, the only one where she's not addressing the viewers with her gaze in the photograph.